Before we even go any further, if you're wondering if I do still love the final ample, the first. But so that is the art of patience, searching for slow napper. Ugh. New favorite character, I'm going to go with Kieran from For new favorite character, I'm going to go with Kieran from Hey everyone, Clio here, and today we're diving into the mid-year book check-in tag. Before we go even further, if you're wondering if I've had maybe a little bit too much to drink, no, I have a nasty sunburn on my nose, on my forehead, so... But we just have to go with that because, you know, I've procrastinated this video long enough and I really need to film it now because I want to get it out in a few days' time. And so yeah, need to film it now. So sorry for the sunburn. I also would have preferred not to get sunburn, but okay. So the mid-year book check-in tag is probably one of the most popular tags out there. It is one that is taken by a vast majority of the community every single year. So a whole lot of these videos are circulating around this time. I'm probably somewhat on the later side of the people bringing it out, but I still see some book freak out tags appearing from time to time in my timeline at the moment, so there are still other people who are as late as I am to the game. Now, I haven't really done a whole lot of research into this tag before diving into it. I have taken it in the past, but of course I have forgotten all of those questions, and I have watched a lot of other people take this tag, so I do on some level know the content of the questions, but I haven't really thought through the questions too much so far. But yeah, without further ado, let's just dive in. First question is, what is your best book of the year so far? Now, I have thought about this one already, and I have decided that I'm going to go with one book, but this is not my favorite book of the year. I do not make a decision about a favorite book of the year. I might at the end of the year try to go for one book, but at this point in time, I definitely don't want to make those rough decisions yet. At this point in time, there are 3 books that are kind of like top of the line for me. However, they are like books that are very different from one another. They kind of inhabit different parts of my reading taste. You know, you have the fantasy side, you have the more literary fiction side of that. And so it's also difficult for me to scale them compared to one another, you know. One of them has more literary merit than the other one does. But does that mean that it needs to win out over the fantasy book that I enjoyed a whole lot, that made me cry and all of those things? So I don't really feel like I can really scale these off of one another, so I cannot really make a decision about which one of these is my favorite so far. However, I will soon be coming out with a video of my favorite books of the year so far, so I'll get to gush about everything that I want to gush about within that video. For this video's purpose, I'm gonna choose one, and I'll explain to you guys why in a minute. So for my best book of the year for this video, I've chosen for Master of Sorrows by Justin Call. The reason that I've chosen this one is that this was one that really took me on a ride. It transported me. I was so engrossed, so engaged. I cried. I loved it. I was so along for every second of this book, and it's been a very long time that I felt that particular way about a book. It's not to say that I don't enjoy any of the other books that I read, or that, you know, I haven't read a great fantasy in a long while or anything like that, but this particular type of enjoyment, this particular type of awe doesn't happen very often. The reason for that being my expectations. You know, for this one, going into it, I didn't really know. I had hopes, and I really hoped to love this one, but it wasn't like I was going into it expecting to love it. I wasn't going into it with the expectations of a whole community yet. There was one person who finally pushed me to read it. I already had it on my shelves. I had it on my shelves because I had seen a video, like probably at this point in time, like 2 years ago, I guess, of somebody who had read Master of Sorrows, and she was saying like, it's a really great read. Something about her explanation made me interested in this book, and so I bought it, but it sat on my shelves until Ashley from A Frolic Through Fiction was talking about how there is a lot of ableism involved within this book. And so that really sparked my interest, because I want to read more books that feature disabled characters, because as a disabled person myself, I wanted to dive into more disability rep, especially within fantasy, because that is kind of the genre that I'm diving into most this year in any case. And so I did have hopes for this, but I also know how easily the hopes for disability rep can be shattered, and so this was such a relief. I absolutely loved the way that disability was handled within this one, the way that it was used, the way that it was intertwined with the fantastical elements to this story, and yeah, I just absolutely loved it. I loved not just the disability rep within this one, I also really loved the story, the way that it twisted and turned, the way that it was paced, the sort of like darker sides that we were diving into, the sort of machinations of power and all those things. I absolutely loved this one 100%. And so because of the fact that I had no particular anticipation going into this or no particular expectations going into it, I was also able to really have that sort of like powerful feeling of discovering a book. You know, sometimes being part of the bookish community means that you know so much about books going into it, or that you know so many other people's opinions about books going into a book, that even if you enjoy it or highly enjoy it, it is still a very different experience from the discovery of a great read that you haven't heard too many people talk about or haven't heard anybody talk about. Diving into question number 2, which is the best sequel you've read so far this year. Now, I'm gonna discount rereads. I mean, I haven't done a whole lot of rereading, but I have reread Mistborn Era 1, so for example, those sequels are discounted, but I'm not entirely sure whether Well of Ascension, for example, would win out over the book that I'm going to choose, because while I absolutely love Well of Ascension, I do still love The Final Empire, the first book in Mistborn Era 1, more than I love The Well of Ascension, whereas for this particular book, that is not the case. This particular book I love more than the first book that I read in the series. And so my choice for this one is Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. I liked Assassin's Apprentice. I really liked Assassin's Apprentice. You know, there were a few things that didn't really work for me, but overall I definitely really liked the writing style. I loved the story. I was engrossed. I enjoyed it and all of those things, but it was also not the case that I couldn't wait to dive into the sequel, for example, or that I was like so transported to continue, because it took me 2 years to continue on, to reread Assassin's Apprentice and continue on. But Royal Assassin, this book broke me. I was so invested with this book. You know, like, this book is very bleak, it's very sad, like there's almost no sprinkling of hope throughout this, and even though that is the case, I was constantly hoping that things would turn around, that, you know, the way that things were spiraling out of control, that things were spiraling downwards, the evolution that was taking place, that would turn around and that things would evolve differently so that Fitz could still have his sort of like happy moment in this book. This book broke me in that sense, but when I finished it, I also absolutely wanted to dive into the sequel. It's been a long time since I hated a character as much as I hated a character in this one, for example, and there definitely were very difficult parts to read through with this one. There was also this sort of like impending sense of doom that was really meaning that I was super anxious for Fitz the entire time. And so without a doubt, this is the sequel that got me most engrossed so far within this year. Third question is a new release that you're excited to dive into. Now, there's only one new release that I actually have on my shelf that I haven't finished yet, and that is Master Artificer by Justin Call. So as much as I've been raving about Master of Sorrows by Justin Call, I have struggled with sequel so far, but that has mainly been because of my own priorities and because of the time when I picked it up. So when I picked it up, I was in a reading slump, and it's really not a book to read in a reading slump because, you know, I think the first one picks up rather quickly. It is also like half of the page count that the second one has, but so the second one definitely has a lot more exposition in the beginning, for example. So a lot more that you need to acquaint yourself with. And while in the middle of a reading slump, that was definitely not the time to read that. And so I put it down because I was like realizing that my reading mood was just doing the book a disservice. So I still need to pick it up again, because the problem is that now I'm just daunted to dive into it because I'm just fearful that I'm not gonna enjoy it, that it wasn't my reading mood but that it was the book. But I should just continue on with it. I should just get over that feeling. But in any case, that is the only new release that I actually have on my shelves that I still need to read. But there are definitely a lot that I would want to get to. The problem is that, you know, my goal is to reduce the amount of unread books on my shelves, and so I am also preventing myself from buying a lot of books at the moment. So some books that I've been looking forward to that I haven't allowed myself to buy so far. Let's look at my sort of like overview of what came out so far this year that I was interested in. So definitely, for example, The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick, because Sada from Voyage to Words Really love that one. And we also have Brood by Jackie Polzin, which is a sort of like literary fiction novel, I think, that has to do with like somebody taking care of a whole bunch of chickens. It sounded great when I heard a booktuber talk about it. Then we have Of Women and Salt, a sort of like multi-generational story set in Cuba, I think, by Gabriela Garcia. Really want to read that one as well at some point. This One Sky Day by Leonie Ross. It's a Caribbean novel. I don't actually know too much about it, but I have been hearing great things about it, so I want to. Terminal Boredom by Izumi Suzuki, which is a short story collection translated from Japanese, which sounded very interesting when I heard a booktuber talk about it. And Still Life by Sarah Winman definitely also is one that I'm very interested in. I read Tin Man by Sarah Winman and really enjoyed it, so Still Life is also definitely on my radar. So those are kind of the major ones that I wish to get around to at some point, but it might not necessarily be 2021, for example. Then the fourth one is your most anticipated release for 2021 for the second half of the year. Now I'm gonna go with one that's coming out super soon, especially when this video is coming out. It's like less than a week, I think, until the release of that book, and that is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I am lucky to have an R copy for that, which I'm currently reading, and I'm definitely, like, I am 75% through or something like that, and I can already tell you guys, unless this ending completely disappoints me, I am going to be putting this one most likely, at the very least, on my favorite fantasy list of the year, but most likely on my favorite books of the year list, because I am really enjoying a lot. So it is kind of branded as Mulan meets Song for Achilles, and so we mainly start off the story by following one character, which is this girl whose brother and father have been murdered in a sort of like bandit raid, and she takes over the identity of her brother because her brother had been told his fortune, which was that he was going to become great. He was destined for greatness. She, however, was destined for nothing. And so she takes over her brother's identity in order to try and cheat fate and get his fate instead. The book very much focuses on gender queerness, while she's trying to take over her brother's identity and trick the gods into believing that she is actually her brother, and so tries to present herself as masculine as possible, as much like a man. And so the book often focuses on walking that fine line that she's doing between those two gender identities, but also of how, you know, maybe one or the other isn't enough to describe who she is. Maybe she is neither, maybe she is just who she is, which is something else. This book also discusses gender with another character, for example, and that nuance and that complexity that is put into the portrayal of gender within this book is also put in a whole lot of other aspects of this novel. So far a really great read, and something that is definitely, hopefully, going to end up being an all-time favorite. Next question is your most disappointing read of the year so far, and I'm not even going to battle my own laziness and go and get that book off of my unhauled cart. I'll just have a picture here. I'll even put a picture of the English cover in any case, because I have it in Dutch, so I would in any case still need to put the English one over there at some point. But so that is The Art of Patience, Searching for Snow Leopards in Tibet by Sylvain Tesson. This is a book translated from French. It won a prestigious literary award in France. It is a book about a French journalist, Sylvain Tesson, who is invited to go to Tibet in search of snow leopards. He's invited there by a French photographer and his crew, and so he's kind of attracted to the idea of searching for solitude and, you know, finding yourself in the solitude and things like that. And the book is very much not about snow leopards. So if you are interested in it, in spite of my huge disappointment with it, then definitely know that going into it, because if you want to go into it looking for snow leopards, then you're definitely going to be disappointed. I kind of knew it was going to go into more of the sort of like reflective side, but even then I still felt like I wanted there to be something about the snow leopards, you know, some explanation of, you know, I don't know, the mythical status of snow leopards, what they mean to Tibetans, the sort of like, I don't know, some sort of biological facts about snow leopards, some sort of an information about where snow leopards can be found. And to some extent, some of that information was in there, but so limited. And the main problem, I guess, was that I could not stand this author. The authorial voice is very high within this book. The author very much will determine whether you like or dislike this book. I think almost all negative reviews for this book mention the same thing, being that the author comes across as being an asshole. So Whether it was because there was just a little bit too much of the male gaze within the book, or whether it was because, you know, he just sounds very smug, very full of himself, and he's just talking about himself all of the time. A lot of people dislike this author. And so, yeah, if you can get over that, then maybe this book is for you. It is very much a stylized, over-stylized in my opinion, description of his journey there. But when you look at the positive reviews, people who've loved it really love that language and really love that contemplation. It's just that that really did not come across for me. For me, that really was all over the top, and maybe I found it to be over the top just because I couldn't stand the author. But in any case, for me, this was not the one, and so I would say I don't think it's worth diving into, but that's of course because that is my experience with the book. Next up we get the opposite, your most surprising read of the year so far. And so I guess I have two options for that, which are both books by authors I'd previously read where I kind of had a mixed experience, I guess, or like an unsure experience. And so I'm not entirely sure which one of these to choose, but I'm guessing I'm gonna go with Human Acts by Han Kang. So Human Acts by Han Kang was a book that I absolutely enjoyed, but I had previously read The Vegetarian by her. And while The Vegetarian definitely was an interesting read, I also totally couldn't make up my mind about it. I didn't really know whether I disliked it, whether I liked it, whether I was indifferent to it. The whole experience of reading that was just like, I don't know what I just read, I guess, basically. So I really want to reread it at this point in time because having read her Human Acts, I absolutely loved it. Now, don't get me wrong, they're very different. The Vegetarian is very much more sort of like experimental, dreamlike, I guess, more maybe like more nightmarish like, whereas Human Acts is more realistic. It is a book in which we are exploring what happened during the Gwangju uprising in Korea. And so we are looking at that story from very different perspectives. And what just really made that so impactful was her beautiful writing style, combined with the fact that what she's writing about is very brutal, very straightforward, very visceral, gory at times. And so she's writing about horrible things, but using this beautiful language that kind of heightens the sort of like horror effect of what is taking place. And so it was a page in history that I knew nothing about that I found super engrossing, super engaging, and even though it was such a difficult read, I also couldn't turn away from it. I couldn't put that book down because even though it was so uncomfortable and so confronting to read about what humans are able to do to one another, there were really horrible things being described in that one. And so if you want to dive into that one, just be aware that, you know, you will be confronted with very horrible acts and you will be confronted with very clear descriptions of what is taking place as well. You are not spared as a reader. You are given all of the information. And so you are like, it's not shying over certain pages of that dark chapter of history. I absolutely loved that book, and it really made me reevaluate my experience with Han Kang, made me go, okay, I do want to read more by her. I had previously already felt like, okay, I want to read something else by her to see, you know, what my experience is going to be with that. But now I want to dive into more of her work in order to hopefully find other of her works that touch me the way that this book has. Next up is what your new favorite author is. Now, I don't even think I have such a thing as favorite authors. There are a few authors that I have really enjoyed books by, and so as a result, I'm always interested to see what they come out with. Like, if I have a favorite author, I'm guessing it's going to be Brandon Sanderson because I've enjoyed the majority of the books by him that I've read, but I've also just read more by him than I've read by some other authors, for example. So when it comes to this year, I guess I'll just be highlighting Han Kang, which I've just talked about, and then the other person that I was considering for a previous question, which is Elif Shafak, because I had previously read a book by her which I enjoyed, but I had a mixed experience with, and then I read The Bastard of Istanbul this year, and I really loved that one, and so it's made me kind of keep her more on my radar than I'd previously done. You know, I think after her first book, no, like people are always kind of on my radar if I really enjoyed them. But really the second book is kind of what determines whether they're on a favorite author radar or not, and so having read the second book by her and loving that so much has kind of made me go like, okay, I definitely want to make sure that I do pick up more Elif Shafak in order to determine whether she is potentially a new favorite author or not. But so as I said, I don't have a formal list of my favorite authors. There are a couple of authors that I definitely want to read more by. Like based off of half a year of reading, there's nobody who really entered the new pantheon of favorite authors. Next up, there is a new fictional crush. I do not crush. And so I'm basically going to equate it together with the next question, which is your new favorite character. For new favorite character, I'm going to choose Kieran from A Chorus of Dragons. Kieran is just such an endearing character. He's just one of those characters who, has his heart in the right place and you're constantly rooting for him, but he's also constantly screwing up. He's constantly embroiled in all of this stuff, but he also makes wrong choices or, does things that cause problems. And so he's one of those super charismatic characters who you cannot help but root for. Cherry on top is of course that he is queer and that he is part of a ship that I'm absolutely in love with. So yeah, Kieran for the win, a new favorite character, definitely. So I basically became too lazy to go and grab the books, I guess, for the past few questions. So next question is book that made me cry. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Master of Sorrows did also make me cry, so that would definitely be a contender, but I'll mention a different book here. I don't think that these are the only books that made me cry. Human Acts, for example, definitely also made me cry at some point. But the one that I'm going to be mentioning here is a recent one, which is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. Did not see that coming because I didn't really think it was that hard-hitting. I actually thought it was a lot more light. And it definitely is light for a whole lot of its page length. So basically in it we are following our protagonist, Eleanor Oliphant. She is completely fine. So she is basically just content with the life that she is living. From an outsider's perspective, you might think like, is that all there is to her life? She's single, she lives on her own, she doesn't necessarily have a huge budget. She's basically living in sort of like, social housing, and she has a job but she doesn't really hold a high function or anything like that. She doesn't have good contact with her co-workers. Basically her co-workers just make fun of her. There doesn't seem to be any sort of friend in her life, and she just has a weekly call with her mother, with whom she has a very complex relationship. However, Eleanor herself definitely is satisfied with that life, definitely is content with that life. She doesn't need more, she doesn't want more. However, throughout the book, as she's coming more into contact with one of her co-workers, she starts to be exposed to more, and she also starts to see that perhaps she does want more. But as I indicated, she has a very complex relationship with her mother, and it is indicated from the beginning that there is perhaps some sort of a past trauma there. She has like one side of her face that is burned, and so she survived some sort of a fire and she was involved in a sort of famous case. All of these hints we do get from the beginning, and as the book progresses we will see her sometimes kind of remembering things but then suppressing those memories. And so in the darker pages of this book we dive into that past trauma, and that is definitely when the waterworks were out and I was crying throughout. Basically that part of the book, it was a huge therapy session for me, because Eleanor herself also goes through therapy at that point in time, and it was necessary. I needed that therapy. I needed that sort of like structure of her going through that trauma through therapy in order for me not to completely break down. But I definitely cried a whole lot in that part of the book. It is a book that I heavily recommend. It is kind of light in places, funny in places, and also hard-hitting. If you like hard-hitting contemporary, this is definitely one for you. Next up, a book that made me happy. Now we're gonna have to think about that one, because I don't often actively think a book makes me happy. So let's see what I actually read this year and whether anything would follow along with that. Conclusion is I do not read happy stories. Maybe I'll do kind of spin on this. So I'll mention Skin by E.M. Reapy, which is a book that got me motivated. So did it make me happy? No, but it motivated me to change. It motivated me to work out at least for like 2 weeks, and then my usual lazy procrastinating self kicked in again, and so I haven't been working out for a very long time again. But so hey, for 2 weeks time I was very much motivated to work out. So Skin by E.M. Reapy is kind of like what I thought Eleanor Oliphant was going to be. It's a story about a woman who is dissatisfied with her life, and so one of her friends took a sort of like a world trip, and that really changed her whole mindset. She had this sort of like eat, pray, love moment, and so our protagonist wants to do the same. So she goes to Bangkok, Thailand, but when she goes there, you know, her experience is very different from the experience her friend has lived through. She is having a lousy time, a horrible time, and the book is very much about, you know, the journey that she makes to self-acceptance, to self-love, the way that she finds new motivation, new goals in life, and one of those goals is related to a love that she discovers for spinning. I hate spinning, so that it was weird that that motivated me, but it did definitely motivate me to, you know, exercise and, you know, get that sort of like runner's high without going running. I basically started like jump roping and using my my step aerobics a little bit and things like that. But so it really got me motivated. I really liked that book and the storyline, the positive storyline that run through that one. So I think that that one is the closest one that I can mention to a book that made me happy. Every book makes me happy because I enjoy reading, so, but most of them are depressing reads that it is difficult to describe my experience with them as a happy experience. Alright, next up, most beautiful book. Now, the most beautiful book, I guess, is one that I got on the 1st of July, so I did not officially have it before the mid-year point of the year. And it is also in a recent video, so if you go and check out like the past video on my channel, you will see it at the end of the video. Like the very last minutes of the video is when I mention that book and I show you guys that book. So let that be that, because that is also a Dutch edition, so it's also not an edition that you guys could get unless you're a Dutch speaker. But so I will mention another one that I've actually already mentioned within this video, and that is Master Artificer. This is just a gorgeous copy. I mean, I actually think that Master of Sorrows is more beautiful, but I didn't get it this year. But Master Artificer is just equally stunning. It's just that I like the sort of like color palette a little bit more of Master of Sorrows. So this sort of like black and silver one versus the blue and gold one. I'm just somebody who likes gold in general. I like yellow. I like yellow, I like gold, so I guess that one just naturally calls out to me. But this is just stunning artwork and I'm absolutely in love with this particular copy. I also only bought like 10 books in the first half of the year, but even then it is kind of tight, and I'm actually starting to wonder now whether this is the correct choice. You know, you have two very different styles, so I very much love this one, but there's another one that I'll give you a bonus one because it's a very different style, but it's also a stunning cover. And so, second one is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. So this is a lot more minimalist in its style, but you know, I think this one, first of all, is already stunning in itself. It really grabs the attention with its sort of like, you know, prime color scheme of, you know, red, blue and yellow. And, you know, it also kind of draws the attention here. It kind of evokes attention because of that sun that's kind of like disappearing here already. Kind of really catches the eye. But then when you combine it with, first of all, these stunning end pages, but especially the sprayed edges, I just think it is amazing. Super minimalist, but super gorgeous cover. So it is a very different approach to the beautiful cover, but both of these I absolutely love the covers for. And then the final question is a book that I still need to read. Obviously, there are a whole lot of books that I still need to read. You know, I kind of set myself a plan at the beginning of the year, so there are like a lot of books that I still need to read in that regard. But I guess the one that I'll be mentioning here is just kind of like the chunkiest one that I can mention, and that is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. So I am already reading it. I'm reading it for a read-along, and we should be finished by the mid of September, but I'm already behind. We started reading this one on the 1st of July, and so I think I'm like 2 days behind at this point in time. So it also happened with The Count of Monte Cristo, which I read through a read-along last year, and there I was like months behind because that was like a 6-month read along, and I was like, I only read for the first month and the final month, so I did catch up to that, and I'll probably do the same if need be for Les Miserables. But my goal is definitely to just keep on track rather than procrastinate on it and then having to read the entire thing in one go. Kind of hope to stay on track with this one and then just have a small chunk to read every day, because I will admit that it isn't going as well as I was hoping for. Les Miserables is my favorite musical. I absolutely love it. I know all the songs by heart, and I was very much hoping to be able to go and see the new production in London, but obviously with the pandemic that hasn't been able to happen, and so one day it will happen. But yeah, Les Miserables is basically a story about... It's basically a sad, depressing story, the way that I've just indicated that I really love my stories, dark, gloomy, sad. And so Les Miserables is a story of basically Jean Valjean, a convict who has just sat out his sentence. And so he is free again and able to resume his past life. However, his past as a convict continues to haunt him. And so I won't go into more than that here, but I do like the basic story of it, but there's a reason why there are a lot of like very short versions of this story, because there's a lot of extra content within Les Miserables, the book, and so far a whole lot of that extra content has been overly explanatory. So hoping to kind of find my groove once we're more into the story, and once we're more into the story that I'm familiar with. Now we're like just adding a whole lot of stuff in front of the story. So yeah, but this is definitely one, like my major one to get through this year still. But so yeah, that was it for the mid-year book check-in tag. I will still do my Q2 stat video as well. And then, as I said, you can also expect a video of me talking about my favorite books that I've read so far this year. But so yeah, as always, I really enjoyed taking this tag. It is really fun to kind of look at the books that you've read so far, look at your reading year so far. And I think this one was kind of rambly. That's kind of the result when I don't do research, of course, in advance. But I also kind of like that way of filming a lot more. I don't know whether it's more enjoyable for you guys or not, but I definitely hope you guys still enjoyed. So hope you guys enjoyed this video, and see you guys for a future one. Bye!